Hey YouTube, Pawinning here. In today's video, I want to talk about all the potential weaknesses on the BMW E36 chassis. I'm going to be talking about stuff all the way from what you can do to the front subframe, rear subframe, you name it, so stick around. Alright guys, welcome to another E36 concept video. So in this one I kind of want to explain all the potential problems that you might run into with the actual chassis and framework of the car itself. Early on, BMW found out that there's chassis reinforcement necessary for especially the rear subframe and stuff, because the chassis stuff started flexing and fatiguing over time, especially to those individuals that decide to modify and track those cars. So later Model 3 Series and M3s had a significant amount of chassis reinforcement as a result of that. So hopefully by the end of this video you can figure out what you need to do in order to give yourself a confident factor of safety for your build in order to have it perform reliably. So it doesn't really matter what kind of suspension setup you're looking for, static, stands, air ride, or whatever. It really just comes down to a personal preference. But what's really important to note is the fact that there are several weaknesses, such as the strut, shock towers. Those all require support plates. So it's very important to have reinforcement plates because they'll sandwich between the actual top hat mount of the strut and the actual shock tower, so that it actually better disperses the load from the suspension on the underside of this shock tower here. The same can be applied to the rear, but you can actually weld in those plates. If you're also planning on installing stiffer sway bars, it's also going to affect the mounting points on the rear subframe mainly, and the best way to show you where those are is with this right here, which is the old rear subframe for my Turbo E36. Taking off the front subframe real quick. So what I wanted to point out with the rear subframe is that when you install rear sway bars, especially ones that are significantly stiffer than stock, it's going to put a lot of strain on this mounting point here on the actual rear subframe. A lot of places like Rally Road and other companies supply a reinforcement bracket that you simply weld on right here to prevent this ear from flexing back and forth. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the front subframe. Now, sufficient power mods will strain the stock engine mounts, and that kind of is pretty straightforward to understand because they are rubber. It's pretty interesting to see how much this entire motor can flex under stock motor mounts. But that being said, these engine mounts rest on thin sheet metal on the front subframe, and because they flex a lot, they're also going to put a lot of flex on the front subframe mounting points as well. In addition to that, the motor is held on with aluminum arms that rest on top of those engine mounts, and over time those arms can crack, so that's just something to be aware of. It's not a stressing issue that requires it to be replaced immediately, but there are aftermarket applications that do sell steel versions of these aluminum motor support arms, and they're actually pretty high quality, and they're perfect for bottom mount turbo setups as well. So in order to better understand what I just said about this front subframe, I decided to just pull an old subframe that I have in stock at the garage just to show you guys. So essentially the steering rack is right here, it mounts right here, and the front of the car goes this way, and the motor mounts sit right here. And the sheet metal right here is pretty thin. I don't know the exact thickness, but it's enough that you can even see that there's a little bit of old flex and old fatigue from the actual motor that used to sit on this front subframe here. And essentially, if I flip this over, the point of which you will reinforce is this pocket right here. A thin sheet of steel can be welded in here to kind of thicken this area up to better reinforce the sheet metal there. And then you can also get a plate that actually seals up this pocket here, allowing for just enough room for a socket to go through when you want to take apart an engine mount. So the next thing I want to make note of is the transmission cross brace. This piece also experiences torque flex from the motor under load. So there's a lot of aftermarket applications that can actually replace that with a steel one. Again, Rally Road is a good place that supplies those. Another point I wanted to make is that the soft transmission mounts are rubber. Again, they will flex with significant amount of power. You'll have power loss, and shifting can become pretty difficult. So the next thing I want to talk about is the rear subframe. The rear subframe of the E36 supports the differential and all the rear suspension and alignment components. The main weaknesses mainly stem from the fact that old stock bushings will cause diff flex, that basically the entire rear subframe and the differential will flex more and more as the car ages, and when you try to put power mods there, you're going to get a significant difference between your engine horsepower and your wheel horsepower. So it's essential to make sure that everything in the rear is taken care of and reinforced, mainly because the subframe mounting points on the chassis, those fracture with age because the metal becomes fatigued as they go through cyclic loads between just like aggressive driving, racing, street conditions, and just general mileage over time. The same can be said with the rear trailing arm pocket. That is actually the most common point that these cars fail at because it experiences a lot of load. The entire arm you can physically see is a massive portion of the mechanics of the rear. And basically when you're going under hard cornering, that pulls on the chassis, so that point can crack pretty easily. So going back to the rear subframe, basically those plates will be welded onto the chassis, sandwiching between this here and the actual bolt that goes through the rear subframe and into the car. And if you want to see a video of all those plates applied to this car, check out the video link there. Basically, Eli and I installed corner speed shop solid bushings, and before we did that, we wanted to weld in reinforcement plates to make sure that the structural rigidity of the car is good. So, in conclusion, basically you want to overbuild your car in order to kind of have a better peace of mind on the structural rigidity of the car with the power mods you choose to make. So the bare minimum you need if you're planning on installing aftermarket struts and shocks is strut tower reinforcement plates that will sandwich between the shocks and struts and the actual shock and strut tower of the car. Those components will better distribute the weight and the load from those suspension components into the shock towers, which will avoid failure or warpage of those shock towers. So the next tier of things that you need to check, especially with power mods, is rear subframe, front subframe, trailing on, rear sway bar reinforcement plates that will all have to be welded into the car. That basically prepares the car best for polyurethane and solid bushings. The next thing I want to address lastly is the upgraded motor mount support arms and transmission cross braces. The stock parts become fatigued over time as they go through cyclic loading from basic driving, street, and race applications. Alright guys, thanks for watching. If you guys like what you see, hit that subscribe button. I also got a Facebook page now that has better and more recent updates with all my builds, so definitely check that out. I'll leave a link in the description. I also have a link in the description for all the parts for this turbo build behind me, if you guys are interested to check that out as well. Regardless, I hope you guys have a good one and catch you guys in the next video. Bye.